The blood on the sand told a story that none of them wanted to read. Senior Chief Drake Holt crouched beside the crushed radio, his jaw tight as he scanned the empty desert stretching toward the Syrian horizon. 36 hours ago, Lieutenant Commander Ronan Ashford had walked into this wasteland on a routine reconnaissance mission. Now all that remained was a dark stain, scattered equipment, and the kind of silence that followed violence. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state or country you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed courage like this where you are from. 36 hours earlier, the Black Hawk touched down at Forward Operating Base Falcon in a swirl of dust and heat. Master Chief Ilara Vance stepped onto the packed earth with a single duffel bag over her shoulder, squinting against the afternoon sun as the rotor wash whipped her short dark hair across her face. The Forward Operating Base sprawled across the desert like a wound, prefabricated housing units and sandbag positions surrounded by razor wire that glinted in the harsh light. A young sailor approached her with a clipboard, his uniform already dark with sweat. "You must be the logistics coordinator," he said, checking her name against his manifest. "Senior Chief Holt said to send you straight to operations for check-in." Ilara nodded, her pale gray eyes taking in the layout of the base with a practiced sweep that lingered on sight lines, cover positions, and a gap in the perimeter wire near the motor pool that nobody seemed to have noticed. She said nothing about it. She simply shouldered her bag and followed the sailor toward the operations center. The operations center hummed with activity, a dozen personnel monitoring screens and communications equipment that linked this remote outpost to commands spanning 3 continents. Ilara found Senior Chief Holt near the tactical display, his broad frame blocking the screen as he argued with a communications specialist about signal interference. He turned when she approached, and his expression shifted from irritation to something colder. "The logistics coordinator," he said, managing to make the title sound like an insult. "Command said you were coming." What exactly is a logistics coordinator supposed to do at a forward operating base in the middle of hostile territory? Ilara met his gaze without flinching. "Support your operations, Senior Chief. Whatever you need." Holt snorted and turned back to the tactical display. "What I need is another shooter, not another desk jockey taking up rack space. Stay out of the way and try not to get anyone killed by accident." A few of the nearby SEALs exchanged glances, some smirking at the dismissal, others simply returning to their work. Ilara felt the weight of their judgment, the automatic assumption that she did not belong here, that she was a bureaucratic burden imposed by distant commanders who did not understand the reality on the ground. She had felt that weight before. She had learned to carry it. The billeting sergeant assigned her a bunk in the support personnel quarters, a plywood box barely large enough for a cot and a footlocker. As she stowed her gear, she heard a commotion outside and stepped into the corridor to find a young specialist sitting against the wall, his face pale and his hand pressed against his ribs. "What happened?" Ilara asked, crouching beside him. The specialist winced. "Took a fall helping unload supplies. I think I cracked something. Doc is busy with pre-mission physicals for the operators." Ilara examined him with gentle, practiced hands, feeling along his rib cage with a touch that spoke of experience she was not supposed to have. "2 cracked ribs," she said quietly. "You need to get these wrapped before they shift." She helped him to his feet and walked him to the medical station, waiting until the corpsman could see him despite the line of impatient SEALs who clearly considered their pre-mission checks more important than one injured support specialist. A few of them shot her annoyed looks, but she ignored them, staying until the specialist was properly treated. Nobody thanked her. She did not expect them to. That evening, she saw Lieutenant Commander Ashford for the first time. He entered the mess hall like he belonged there, which he did, a 15-year veteran with salt and pepper at his temples and the easy confidence of a man who had earned the respect of everyone under his command. When his eyes found Ilara sitting alone at a corner table, he crossed the room and sat down across from her. "You're the new logistics coordinator," he said. "Vance, right?" "Yes, sir." Ashford studied her for a moment, and something flickered in his expression, a curiosity that the others had not shown. "I read your transfer file. Interesting background for a logistics position. Alara kept her face neutral. I go where I'm needed, Commander. He nodded slowly, then smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. Well, Master Chief Vance, I hope you find what you're looking for here. This team is the best I have ever worked with, even if they can be slow to warm up to outsiders. He stood and paused. If you need anything, my door is open. We may be in the middle of nowhere, but that does not mean we forget basic decency. After he left, Alara sat alone with her thoughts, the noise of the mess hall fading in a background static. She had not expected kindness here. It complicated things. Later that night, she slipped from her quarters and walked the perimeter of the base, memorizing patrol patterns and testing the shadows. When she reached the gap in the wire near the motor pool, she stopped and studied it for a long moment. A vulnerability that could get people killed. She could report it, but that would raise questions about why a logistics coordinator was walking the perimeter at midnight. Instead, she filed it away and returned to her bunk. At dawn, Ashford departed on his reconnaissance mission with a foreman element. Alara watched the vehicles disappear into the desert from the operations center doorway, a strange unease settling in her chest. Holt stood nearby, already dismissing her presence with his turn back. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way she had learned to feel danger in places that did not exist on any map. But she was just a logistics coordinator, and logistics coordinators did not have instincts worth trusting. The vehicles vanished over the horizon, and Alara turned away, unable to shake the feeling that she had just watched a man drive toward his death. The first sign that something had gone wrong came at over 700 the next morning when Ashford's element missed their scheduled communication check. Alara was in the operations center reviewing supply manifests, a cover that allowed her to monitor the tactical channels without drawing attention. She watched Holt's expression shift from annoyance to concern as the minutes stretched past the check-in window. Try them again, Holt ordered the communications specialist. Viper 1, this is Falcon Base, requesting status check. The specialist repeated the call 3 times. Each attempt met with empty static. Holt grabbed the handset himself. Ronan, this is Drake. Come back. Nothing. He slammed the handset down and turned to the tactical display, his mind already racing through possibilities. Get the QRF spun up. I want a search team ready in 15 minutes. Alara remained at her station, her fingers still moving across the keyboard, even as every instinct screamed at her to act. She was not supposed to be here for this. She was supposed to be invisible, a ghost in logistics, clothing waiting for a mission that had nothing to do with these men. But Ashford had been kind to her, and kindness was rare enough that she could not simply watch it disappear into the desert. The quick reaction force launched within the hour, a 6-man team led by Petty Officer First Class Tomas Delgado, a young operator with sharp eyes and a reputation for keeping his head when others lost theirs. Alara tracked their progress on the tactical display, watching the blue icons move across the digital terrain toward Ashford's last known position. When they found the ambush site, Delgado's voice came through flat and controlled. Falcon Base, we have signs of engagement. Multiple blood trails, shell casings, vehicle tracks heading northeast. Commander's radio is destroyed. Novodius. Holt leaned over the communications console. Any sign of survivors? Negative. But the blood volume suggests wounded, not killed. Someone was taken alive. The operations center went silent. Alara felt the weight of it pressing down on everyone, the unspoken reality that their commander was now in enemy hands. She had seen this before, in other places with other names, and she knew what came next. The desperate planning, the impossible choices, the clock that started ticking the moment a man became a prisoner. Holt took command with the grim efficiency of a man who had trained for this moment, while hoping it would never come. He ordered the intelligence section to pull every asset they had, demanded satellite coverage and drone support, and began planning a rescue operation with the ferocity of a man determined to bring his commander home. Alara was not invited to the planning sessions. She stood outside the briefing room door, listening to fragments of conversation that drifted through the thin walls. When Chief Warrant Officer Brianna Okonkwo approached her, she did not react. "You should not be here," Okonkwo said quietly, her intelligence officer credentials giving her access to truths that others could not see. "Neither should you," Alara replied without turning. Okonkwo moved to stand beside her, both women facing the closed door. "I know why you're really here, and I know this mission has nothing to do with your assignment." Alara finally looked at her, those pale gray eyes revealing nothing. "He was decent to me." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "The intelligence suggests a 72-hour window. After that, they will either move him or execute him for propaganda value. Then we have 72 hours. We have nothing." Okonkwo glanced around to ensure they were alone. "Holt will never let you near this operation. As far as he knows, you are a liability he cannot afford." Alara said nothing, but something shifted in her expression, a hardness that Okonkwo recognized from classified files she was never supposed to have read. Later that night, Alara sat alone in her quarters, the door secured and the single lamp casting harsh shadows across the plywood walls. She reached into her footlocker and withdrew a photograph, its edges worn soft from years of handling. The young man in the picture wore marine dress blues, his smile bright and unguarded, his eyes the same pale gray as her own. Corporal Marcus Vance, her younger brother, dead at 23 in an operation that officially never happened, killed by enemies who were never identified, buried with honors that could never be spoken aloud. She had made him a promise over his grave. She had sworn that she would never let another good person die in the shadows while she stood by doing nothing. Ashford was a good person. She had known at the moment he sat down across from her in the mess hall and treated her like a human being instead of an inconvenience. She pressed the photograph to her chest and closed her eyes. "I will bring him back," she whispered. "I promise." A soft knock at her door made her slip the photograph away before opening it. Delgado stood in the corridor, his young face troubled. "I saw you watching the briefing," he said quietly. "You understand more than you let on." Alara studied him for a long moment. "What do you want, petty officer?" Delgado hesitated. "Holt's plan has gaps. He is moving too fast, not accounting for the enemy sniper positions we identified during the search. I tried to bring it up, but he shut me down." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you notice things. I watched you help that specialist yesterday when everyone else walked past, and I saw how you looked at the tactical display today. You were not just watching. You were analyzing." Alara felt something loosen in her chest, the smallest crack in the armor she had built around herself. "You're taking a risk talking to me." "Maybe." Delgado met her eyes. "But I would rather take a risk than watch my commander die, because no one had the courage to speak up." He turned and walked away, leaving Alara alone with the knowledge that she had found an ally in a place where she had expected only hostility. She returned to her bunk and began to plan. Holt's operation would fail. She could see it clearly now, the gaps that Delgado had mentioned and others that the young operator had not yet learned to recognize. The enemy knew they were coming. They would be waiting 72 hours. Less now. She could not stop Holt from launching his flawed rescue, but she could be ready when it failed. And she would be ready. Holt launched the rescue operation at 0300, convinced that darkness would provide the cover his team needed. Alara watched from the operations center as 6 SEALs loaded into 2 vehicles and disappeared into the night, their infrared signatures fading from the thermal cameras mounted on the perimeter towers. She had tried one more time to voice her concerns. 3 hours earlier, she had approached Holt outside the armory and spoken with careful precision about the enemy sniper positions that Delgado had identified, about the lack of adequate counter-sniper support, about the terrain that would funnel his team into a kill zone. Holt had looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Stick to your supply manifests," he had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let the operators handle the operating." Now she stood before the tactical display, watching blue icons move toward a trap that she could see as clearly as if she had drawn it herself. Okonkwo stood beside her, both women silent as the minutes crawled past. The first shots came at 0347. "Contact, contact!" Delgado's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with controlled urgency. Multiple shooters, elevated positions. They were waiting for us. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Communications specialists relayed coordinates, while intelligence officers scrambled to red-mask drone assets. Alara remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the display as the blue icon scattered and took cover. Holt's voice cut through the noise. Viper team, status report. 2 wounded, Delgado responded. Kowalski took 1 in the leg, Torres in the shoulder. We are pinned down. Enemy snipers have the high ground on 3 sides. We cannot advance. Alara watched the tactical display, her mind mapping the terrain from memory. The enemy had chosen their position perfectly. Any approach to the compound would funnel through a narrow valley with elevated ridgelines on either side. Classic ambush geometry. The kind of trap that killed men who rushed in without proper reconnaissance. Can you withdraw? Holt demanded. A burst of static, then Delgado again. Negative. They have our exit covered. Every time we move, they adjust. These are not insurgents, Senior Chief. These are trained snipers. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Trained snipers meant professional opposition, possibly foreign advisors or special operations from a hostile nation. It meant that Ashford's capture was not random violence, but a deliberate operation. It meant the enemy had known they were coming. Alara turned to Okonkwo. They have intelligence on us. Someone talked, or they intercepted our communications. Okonkwo's face was grim. I will start a security review. But that does not help Viper Team right now. On the display, the blue icons remained pinned, surrounded by red markers indicating enemy positions. Every few minutes, another burst of fire would send the SEALs scrambling for new cover. They were trapped, bleeding, and running out of options. Holt made the call at 0430. Viper Team, fall back. Use smoke and suppressive fire. Get our wounded out. What about the commander? Someone asked. Holt's voice was hollow. We will regroup and try again. But I'm not losing more men tonight. The withdrawal was ugly. Alara listened to the radio chatter as the SEALs fought their way out of the kill zone, dragging their wounded through terrain that offered no mercy. By the time they reached the extraction point, 3 more men had taken shrapnel from enemy grenades. They returned to base at 0600, bloody and defeated. Alara watched from the operations center doorway as the wounded were rushed to medical, as the uninjured operators stood in silence with the hollow look of men who had failed. Holt was the last to exit the vehicle. His uniform was torn and stained, his face a mask of barely contained fury. When he saw Alara watching, something in him snapped. This is your fault, he snarled, crossing the distance between them with dangerous speed. Intelligence was supposed to give us accurate enemy positions. Your people fed us bad information. Alara held her ground. I tried to warn you about the sniper positions. You chose not to listen. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, his hands clenched into fists, his body trembling with rage and shame and the unbearable weight of failure. But Delgado stepped between them, his young face pale but determined. She did try to warn you, Senior Chief. I was there. She identified the exact threat that hit us. Holt stared at Delgado like he had never seen him before. Then he turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the operations center where he would have to report his failure to command. Okonkwo appeared at Alara's side. New intelligence just came in. The enemy is accelerating their timeline. Ashford will be executed in 48 hours. They are filming it for propaganda. Alara absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside, something cold and precise clicked into place. 48 hours. Holt's team was combat ineffective, with 5 wounded and the rest shaken. Command would need at least 72 hours to position another rescue force. There was only one option left. She turned to Okonkwo. I need access to the armory. Quietly, Okonkwo studied her for a long moment. Whatever you are planning, it is suicide. Maybe. Alara's pale gray eyes held no fear, only the calm certainty of a woman who had made her decision. But I made a promise. She walked away before Okonkwo could respond, her mind already shifting into operational mode. She would need to move fast gather equipment, slip out of the base before anyone noticed she was gone. 48 hours. She had worked with less. Alara slipped out of the base at 2200, moving through the gap in the perimeter wire that she had identified on her first night. The same vulnerability she had chosen not to report now served as her exit point, a small irony that she filed away without emotion. The desert at night was a different world. Cold air replaced the brutal heat of day, and the stars burned with an intensity that city dwellers never experienced. She moved low and fast across the terrain, her dark clothing blending with the shadows as she navigated by landmarks she had memorized from satellite imagery. The enemy compound lay 12 kilometers to the northeast. She covered the first 8 kilometers in just over 2 hours, pausing periodically to scan for patrols and adjust her route. Her body moved with the efficiency of long practice, muscles remembering patterns ingrained through years of training that her cover identity was never supposed to have received. She reached her observation point at 0100, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the compound from nearly a kilometer away. From her pack, she withdrew a compact spotting scope and settled into a prone position, letting her breathing slow as she began her surveillance. The compound was larger than intelligence had suggested. A central building surrounded by smaller structures, all enclosed by a wall of stacked sandbags and concrete barriers. She counted 18 visible guards on rotating patrol, plus 4 fixed positions at the corners. Vehicle traffic suggested at least another dozen personnel inside. More concerning were the sniper positions. She identified 3 elevated posts with clear sight lines covering every approach to the compound. The shooters who had decimated Holt's team were still in place, still watching. She spent 2 hours mapping every detail, committing patrol patterns and shift changes to memory. When she finally located Ashford, her chest tightened despite her training. He was in the central building, visible through a window on the 2nd floor. Even at this distance, she could see the damage they had done to him. His face was swollen, his posture slumped, his hands bound to a chair. But he was alive. Still alive. She withdrew before dawn, retracing her route with the same careful precision. The gap in the wire welcomed her back, and she slipped into her quarters just as the base began to stir for morning operations. Delgado was waiting outside her door. "Where were you?" he asked quietly, his eyes taking in the dust on her boots and the faint scratches on her hands from navigating rocky terrain in darkness. Alara considered lying, but something in his expression told her it would be pointless. "Walking. For 8 hours." He did not phrase it as a question. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, leaving it open behind her. Delgado hesitated, then followed. "You went to the compound," he said. "You conducted reconnaissance on your own." Alara began cleaning the dust from her equipment, her movements methodical. "Holt is planning another assault. I heard him briefing the remaining operators this morning. Same approach, more firepower. He thinks the problem was insufficient suppression." "The problem was the sniper positions," Delgado said. "More firepower will not matter if we cannot neutralize their elevated shooters." "No, it will not." Delgado watched her work, understanding dawning on his face. "You know how to fix that. You know how to take out those snipers." Alara paused, her hands still on the scope she was cleaning. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Who are you?" Delgado finally asked. "Really?" She met his eyes. "Someone who made a promise." He held her gaze, then nodded slowly. "Whatever you need, I will help. Kowalski and Torres are in medical, but the rest of the team is still combat effective. If you have a plan that actually works, some of us will listen." Alara resumed her cleaning. "I'm not asking anyone to follow me. This is something I need to do alone. That is suicide. Maybe." She set down the scope and turned to face him fully. "But I have done the impossible before. In places that do not exist, against enemies that were never officially identified. I have survived things that should have killed me, and I have completed missions that Command said could not be done." Delgado stared at her. The logistics coordinator cover story suddenly seemed absurd, a thin fiction that could not possibly contain the woman standing before him. Later that afternoon, Holt called a mission brief. Alara attended uninvited, standing at the back of the room as Holt outlined his revised assault plan. More men, more ammunition, more aggression. The same fundamental approach that had failed before. When he finished, silence hung over the assembled operators. Alara felt their doubt, their fear, their reluctant acceptance of a plan they knew was flawed. She stepped forward. "There's another way." Every head turned. Holt's face flushed with anger. "I told you to stay out of operational planning." "Your plan will fail," Alara said calmly. "The enemy has 3 elevated sniper positions covering every approach. You cannot suppress them with ground fire because the terrain gives them natural defilade. Any force approaching from the south, east, or west will be channeled into kill zones. And I suppose you have a better idea." Holt's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Neutralize the snipers first. A single shooter with proper positioning could eliminate all 3 positions before the assault begins. Without their overwatch, the compound's defenses become manageable." Holt laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "A single shooter against 3 trained snipers in fortified positions. That is not a plan, that is a fantasy." Alara held his gaze. "I have done it before." The room went still. She could feel them reassessing her, seeing past the logistics coordinator cover to something harder and more dangerous beneath. Holt's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." She said nothing. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, Holt shook his head. "Get out of my briefing room. When this is over, I am having you transferred so far from operational commands that you will forget what a rifle looks like." Alara turned and walked out, feeling Delgado's eyes on her back. She had shown too much, revealed too many edges of her true self. Her cover was compromised, her position untenable. None of it mattered anymore. Tonight, she would end this herself. The night swallowed her whole as Alara moved through the desert, her silhouette indistinguishable from the rocks and scrub that dotted the barren landscape. She carried a rifle now, a weapon that no logistics coordinator should have known how to acquire from a locked armory, without leaving traces. The familiar weight settled against her shoulder like an old friend, cold steel and polymer that had been her constant companion through years of shadow warfare. Okonkwo had come through. A key card left on a desk, a camera angle adjusted, a 10-minute window when the armory guard took an unscheduled break. No words exchanged, no acknowledgement given. Just professional courtesy between 2 women who understood that some missions existed beyond official channels. Alara reached her first waypoint at 2300, a shallow depression that offered concealment while she verified her position against the stars. The compound lay 6 kilometers ahead, and between her and Ashford stood an enemy force that had already proven capable of destroying a SEAL team. She thought about Marcus as she moved. Her brother had been 23 when he died, young enough to still believe that courage and training could overcome any obstacle. He had walked into an ambush much like the one that had claimed Ashford, trusting his teammates and his mission. The men who killed him had never been identified. The operation had never officially existed. His sacrifice had been buried in classified files that would remain sealed for decades. She had joined special operations to honor his memory. She had become something more than human, a weapon forged in darkness, because that was the only way she knew to ensure his death meant something. Now she carried that purpose forward, one careful step at a time. The first patrol appeared at 0100, 3 fighters moving along a ridge that paralleled her approach route. Alara dropped into the shadows and controlled her breathing, becoming part of the landscape as the men passed within 30 meters of her position. They were alert, but not alarmed, conducting routine security rather than active search. They did not know she was coming. She let them pass and continued forward. The terrain grew more treacherous as she approached the compound, rocky outcroppings giving way to a maze of shallow wadis and dried creek beds. She navigated by instinct and memory, trusting the mental map she had constructed during her reconnaissance. Every shadow could hide a sentry. Every rise could expose her to enemy observation. At 0230, she encountered her first obstacle. A 2-man patrol had established a static position directly in her planned route, their thermal signatures visible through her scope as they shared a cigarette and spoke in low voices. She could not go around them without adding 2 hours to her approach. She could not wait for them to move without risking discovery as dawn approached. She closed the distance in absolute silence, moving from cover to cover with the patience of a predator. 20 meters. 10. 5. The first man died without a sound, her blade finding the gap between his helmet and body armor with surgical precision. The second turned at the subtle noise of a body falling, his eyes widening in a fraction of a second before her hand closed over his mouth and the knife completed its work. She lowered both bodies into the shadows and cleaned her blade on the sand. Her hands did not tremble. Her pulse remained steady. This was what she had been made for, what years of training and countless operations had refined into cold perfection. She felt nothing. That was the price of becoming a weapon. The compound came into view at 0300, its lights casting pale circles against the darkness. From her new position, closer than her previous reconnaissance, she could see details that had been invisible before. The guards were professional, moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of military training. The sniper positions were manned by shooters who scanned their sectors with disciplined regularity. And there were more of them than she had counted before. Many more. Her reconnaissance had identified 18 guards and 3 sniper positions. Now she counted at least 30 fighters visible, with 4 elevated shooting platforms instead of 3. Reinforcements had arrived, probably in response to Holt's failed assault. The enemy was expecting another rescue attempt. They were not expecting a single operator approaching alone through terrain they considered impassable. Alara settled into her final position, a natural depression between 2 boulders that offered clear sight lines to all 4 sniper platforms. She assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, each component clicking into place with the precision of machinery designed for a single purpose. The scope brought the world into sharp focus. She could see the first sniper clearly now, a bearded man in mismatched camouflage who cradled his rifle with the easy familiarity of a professional. He was scanning the southern approach, watching for the assault he expected to come from the direction of the American base. He never thought to look east, toward the impossible terrain that no sane commander would send a team through. Alara controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. The wind was minimal, perhaps 2 knots from the northwest. Distance to the first target, 870 meters. She made the calculations automatically, adjusting her aim for elevation, wind, and the barely perceptible curve of the earth. 1 shot. That was all she would get before every enemy in the compound knew she was here. 1 shot to begin the cascade that would either save Ashford or end with her body cooling in the desert sand. She thought of her brother one more time. She thought of the promise she had made over his grave. Then she exhaled slowly and let her finger rest against the trigger. The night held its breath, waiting for her to shatter its silence. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and 870 meters away, the first sniper collapsed without ever knowing death had found him. Alara worked the bolt and shifted her aim before the sound of the shot finished echoing across the desert. The second sniper was already turning toward his fallen comrade. Confusion written across his face in the half-second before her round punched through his chest and dropped him where he stood. 2 down, 2 remaining. Perhaps 15 seconds before the compound fully understood what was happening. She found the third sniper scrambling for cover behind a concrete barrier, his movements frantic as he tried to locate the source of the gunfire. Her third shot caught him mid-stride, spinning him sideways before he crumpled into a motionless heap. The fourth sniper was smarter. He had dropped below his parapet the moment the first shot rang out, and now he was invisible behind layers of sandbags and reinforced walls. Alara waited, her scope fixed on the position, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting throughout the compound below. Shouts echoed through the night. Fighters poured from buildings, weapons raised, searching for a threat they could not locate. Someone was screaming orders in Arabic, directing men toward defensive positions that would do nothing against a shooter they could not see. The fourth sniper made his mistake 30 seconds later. He rose just enough to scan the eastern approach through his own scope, try to locate the ghost who had killed his comrades. Alara was waiting. Her fourth shot traveled 912 meters and found him before he could process what he was seeing. 4 enemy snipers eliminated in under 2 minutes. The compound's elevated overwatch was gone, its defenders blind to threats beyond their immediate perimeter. She allowed herself 3 seconds to acknowledge the accomplishment, then began relocating. Counter-sniper doctrine dictated that she move after every engagement, never allowing the enemy to fix her position. But something was wrong. The compound's response was too coordinated, too fast. They were not panicking. They were executing a rehearsed response. The first counter-sniper round cracked past her position before she finished moving, close enough that she felt the pressure wave against her cheek. They had shooters she had not identified, professionals hidden in positions that had not been visible during her reconnaissance, held in reserve specifically for this contingency. Alara rolled into a shallow depression as 2 more rounds impacted where she had been lying. She counted muzzle flashes in the darkness. 3 additional shooters, positioned in a triangle that covered her likely escape routes. They were good, very good, but she had faced better. 8 years earlier, a young Marine corporal named Alara Vance had walked into scout sniper school with nothing but determination and a promise made over her brother's grave. She had graduated at the top of her class, the first woman to complete the program in its history. Within 6 months, she had been recruited to a joint special operations unit that officially did not exist. Master Chief Solomon Reeves had been her mentor, a legend among operators who had spent 30 years doing the work that kept nations safe. He had seen something in her that others missed, a combination of natural talent and absolute commitment that could be shaped into something extraordinary. He had trained her personally for 2 years, pushing her beyond every limit she thought she had. Long-range precision shooting, urban stalking, counter-sniper operations, close-quarters combat, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Every discipline a special operator could master, she had learned at the feet of a man who had written the doctrine. By her 3rd deployment, she had earned a call sign that was spoken in whispers among intelligence communities on 4 continents. Spectre, the ghost who killed without warning and vanished without trace. 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. Operations in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, and places that would remain classified for decades. She had eliminated high-value targets that entire task forces had failed to reach. She had extracted prisoners from compounds that intelligence analysts called impenetrable. She had become exactly what Master Chief Reeves had believed she could be, a weapon unlike any other. Now that weapon lay in a shallow depression in the Syrian desert, pinned by 3 enemy counter-snipers who were methodically trying to kill her. She smiled in the darkness. This was familiar territory. The counter-snipers expected her to retreat, to seek cover and break contact. Instead, she did something they could not anticipate. She advanced, moving in short bursts between moments of suppressive fire. She closed the distance to the nearest shooter while his attention was fixed on her last known position. He never saw her coming. Her shot took him through the side of his skull at a range of 400 meters. The second counter-sniper panicked, abandoning his position to seek better cover. He made it 6 steps before a round found him. The third was the best of them. He held his position, waiting for her to reveal herself, demonstrating the patience of a trained professional. They remained locked in silent standoff for nearly 5 minutes, each waiting for the other to make a fatal mistake. Alara won by refusing to play his game. She circled wide, sacrificing time for position, until she had an angle he could not have anticipated. Her final shot ended the engagement with clinical precision. 7 enemy snipers eliminated. The compound lay exposed beneath her, its defenders stripped of their greatest advantage. She began moving toward the perimeter, her rifle exchanged for the suppressed pistol at her hip. The hard part was over. Now she had to bring Ashford home. The compound wall was 3 meters of stacked sandbags and concrete barriers, designed to stop vehicle-borne explosives and small arms fire. It was not designed to stop a single operator who had spent years learning to move through spaces that should have been impenetrable. Alara found her entry point on the eastern side, where a drainage culvert passed beneath the wall. The opening was barely wide enough for her shoulders, choked with debris and standing water that smelled of things she chose not to identify. She pulled herself through without hesitation, emerging inside the compound covered in filth but undetected. The chaos of her sniper assault still echoed through the compound. Fighters ran between buildings, shouting conflicting orders as they tried to establish a defensive perimeter against a threat they could not locate. None of them thought to look inward. None of them imagined that the ghost who had killed their snipers was already among them. She moved through shadows with the fluid grace of someone who had made darkness her native element. 2 guards stood at the entrance to the central building, their attention fixed outward on the desert beyond the walls. She approached from behind, her footsteps silent on the packed earth. The first guard died with her blade across his throat, her hand clamped over his mouth to muffle the gurgle of escaping air. The second turned at the soft sound of a body falling, his eyes widening in the instant before her knife found the gap beneath his jaw. She lowered him gently, positioning both bodies to appear as though they had taken cover rather than died. The building's interior was a maze of narrow corridors and small rooms, lit by flickering bulbs that cast more shadows than illumination. Alara cleared each corner with methodical precision, her suppressed pistol raised and ready. She encountered 3 more fighters in the hallways, each engagement lasting less than 2 seconds. The stairs to the second floor were guarded by a single man who sat with his rifle across his knees, his head nodding with the weight of exhaustion. He never woke up. Alara found Ashford in the 3rd room she checked, and for a moment, even her trained composure wavered at the sight of him. They had beaten him badly. His face was swollen beyond easy recognition, his left eye completely closed, his lips split and crusted with dried blood. His hands were bound to a heavy chair with wire that had cut into his wrists, and his uniform hung in tatters that revealed bruises covering most of his torso. But he was alive. His one good eye found her as she entered the room, and confusion flickered across his battered features. The logistics coordinator, he rasped through broken lips. "What are you doing here?" Alara crossed him and began cutting the wire from his wrists. "Getting you out, Commander. Can you walk?" "I can try." He winced as circulation returned to his hands. "How did you get in here? Where's the assault team?" "There is no assault team." She helped him to his feet, steadying him as his legs threatened to buckle. "It is just me." Ashford stared at her with his one functional eye, and she watched understanding begin to dawn through the fog of pain and exhaustion. "Just you. You took out the snipers. You infiltrated a compound with 30+ hostiles. Alone. We can discuss my resume later, Commander. Right now, we need to move." She handed him a pistol taken from one of the guards and positioned herself at the door. He was weak, unsteady, probably suffering from a concussion and several cracked ribs at minimum. Moving through hostile territory with a wounded man was exponentially more dangerous than moving alone. But she had not come this far to leave him behind. They made it to the ground floor before everything went wrong. A fighter emerged from a side room without warning, his rifle coming up as he shouted an alarm. Alara put 2 rounds in his chest before he finished the first word, but the damage was done. His shout echoed through the building, answered by running footsteps and barked commands. "Contact," she said calmly. "Stay behind me." The next 2 minutes were a controlled hurricane of violence. Fighters poured into the corridor from both directions, and Alara met them with the cold precision of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. Her pistol barked in measured cadence, each shot finding its target, each movement flowing into the next with fluid efficiency. Ashford watched her work with the stunned expression of a man witnessing something he had never imagined possible. He had spent 15 years in special operations, had trained with the best operators in the world, had seen combat in every theater the modern military had touched. He had never seen anything like this. She moved through the enemy fighters like water through stone, impossible to grasp and devastating in her passage. When her pistol ran dry, she transitioned to a rifle taken from a fallen enemy without breaking stride. When two fighters rushed her simultaneously, she put them down with a combination of gunfire and hand-to-hand techniques that left both men crumpled on the floor before Ashford could process what had happened. They reached the building's rear exit with a trail of bodies in their wake. The compound beyond was in full alarm now, fighters converging on the central building from all directions. Alara assessed the tactical situation in a heartbeat. We cannot go back the way I came. Too exposed. We need another route. The motor pool, Ashford said, his voice stronger now despite his injuries. Southwest corner. If we can reach a vehicle, we can punch through the main gate. She nodded and took his arm, supporting his weight as they moved into the chaos of the compound. Gunfire crackled around them, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness as the enemy fired at shadows and ghosts. For a moment, moving through the madness with Ashford leaning against her shoulder, Alara felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The motor pool was 50 meters away across open ground that offered no cover and no mercy. Alara counted at least a dozen fighters between their position and the vehicles, with more converging from the northern buildings every second. She pulled Ashford into the shadow of a storage shed and pressed him against the wall. His breathing was labored, each exhale carrying a wet rattle that suggested damage to his lungs. He needed medical attention soon, but soon was a luxury they could not afford. I can create a distraction, she said quietly. Draw their attention east while you move for the vehicles. Ashford shook his head, the motion clearly causing him pain. I'm not leaving you behind. Commander, you are injured. You will slow me down in a firefight. The logical move is for me to cover your extraction. His one good, I found hers in the darkness, and despite the swelling and the blood, she saw steel in his gaze. I have worked with every Tier 1 unit in the American military. SEALs, Delta, Rangers, PJs. I have never seen anyone do what you just did in that building. So do not insult my intelligence by pretending you need me to leave so you can sacrifice yourself. Alara felt something shift in her chest, an unfamiliar sensation that took her a moment to identify. Respect, not the grudging acknowledgement she had earned through violence, but genuine respect from someone who understood exactly what he had witnessed. Then we go together, she said, fast and violent. Can you shoot? He raised the pistol she had given him, his grip steady despite the tremor in his hands. I can shoot. She nodded once and turned her attention back to the motor pool. The enemy fighters were spreading out, establishing a perimeter that would make direct assault suicidal. But they were looking outward, expecting threats from beyond the compound walls. They still had not fully processed that the danger was already inside with them. A memory surfaced unbidden. Master Chief Reeves standing over her during a training exercise, his voice calm as enemy fire simulation rounds cracked overhead. The best sniper does not just shoot, he had said. She thinks. She finds the angle no one else sees. She turns the enemy's assumptions into weapons against them. Alara scanned the compound with new eyes. The fighters were clustered near the motor pool because they expected an external assault. The fuel storage tanks sat 20 meters to the north, poorly guarded because no rational attacker would risk igniting them. The main generator hummed in its housing near the eastern wall, powering the lights that illuminated the compound. She smiled in the darkness. Stay here, she told Ashford. When the lights go out, move for the nearest vehicle. I will meet you there. What are you going to do? Something irrational. She slipped away before he could argue, moving through shadows toward the generator housing. Two guards stood nearby, their attention fixed on the chaos near the central building. She took them both with her knife, lowering their bodies silently before turning to the generator itself. The machine was a commercial diesel unit, ruggedized for field deployment, but not designed to withstand sabotage. She found a fuel line and cut it cleanly, then disabled the emergency shutoff. Diesel began pooling on the ground beneath the housing. She gave it 30 seconds to spread, then moved toward the fuel storage tanks. The tanks were massive, each one holding thousands of liters of diesel and gasoline that kept the compound's vehicles operational. A single incendiary round would turn them into an inferno that would illuminate the desert for kilometers. She did not have an incendiary round, but she had something better. Alara positioned herself 50 meters from the tanks and raised her rifle. The guards near the motor pool were still focused outward, still waiting for an assault that would never come from the direction they expected. She fired once, the round sparking off the metal tank housing. Then again and again, each impact throwing sparks into the fuel-soaked air around the generator. The explosion was spectacular. The generator went first, a bloom of orange fire that ripped through the eastern section of the compound and plunged everything into darkness. A heartbeat later, the fuel tanks followed, a series of cascading detonations that turned night into day and sent fighters diving for cover in every direction. Alara was already moving, through the chaos and the flames, through the smoke and the screaming. She ran toward the motor pool where Ashford was supposed to be waiting. She found him behind the wheel of a battered technical, the engine already running, his injured face illuminated by the hellfire she had unleashed. He had found a rifle somewhere and held it awkwardly in his bound hands. "Get in," he shouted over the roar of the flames. She vaulted into the passenger seat as he slammed the accelerator. The technical lurched forward, tires spinning on loose gravel before finding traction. Fighters emerged from the smoke ahead of them, rifles raised, and Alara leaned out the window to engage. The main gate was 50 meters ahead. 40, 30. A burst of gunfire stitched across the hood, shattering the windshield and filling the cab with flying glass. Ashford hunched lower, but kept his foot on the accelerator, driving blind through the chaos. 20 meters. 10. They hit the gate at 60 kilometers per hour, the impact throwing both of them forward as metal screamed and tore. For a terrible moment, Alara thought they would stop, caught in the wreckage of the barrier. Then they were through, the desert opening before them as the burning compound fell away behind. Ashford kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Alara turned to watch the flames receding in the distance, the ammunition stores beginning to cook off in secondary explosions that painted the sky in shades of red and orange. They had made it out. Against all odds, against all rational assessment, they had made it out alive. But the compound was 5 kilometers behind them now, and the base was still 7 kilometers ahead. They were not safe yet. The technical died 3 kilometers from a base, its engine coughing once before falling silent. Steam hissed from beneath the shattered hood where enemy rounds had torn through critical components. Alara tried the ignition twice before accepting what she already knew. "We walk from here," she said. Ashford nodded grimly and pushed open his door. The movement cost him, his face contorting with pain as damaged ribs shifted beneath his skin. He was getting worse. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the escape was fading, leaving behind the full weight of his injuries. Alara moved to support him, slinging his arm over her shoulders and taking as much of his weight as she could manage. Together, they stumbled into the desert, leaving the useless vehicle behind. The terrain was brutal. Loose sand and jagged rocks conspired to turn every step into an ordeal. Ashford's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute, the wet rattle in his lungs becoming more pronounced. He needed surgery, needed a trauma team, needed things that were still kilometers away across hostile ground. Behind them, headlights appeared on the horizon. The enemy had recovered faster than she had hoped. "How many?" Ashford gasped. Alara glanced back, counting the lights. 4 vehicles, maybe 5, probably 20 fighters or more, and they were closing fast. She scanned the terrain ahead and found what she was looking for. A rocky outcropping rose from the desert floor 500 meters to the north, a natural defensive position that would provide cover and sight lines. "There," she said. "We make our stand there." "You mean you make your stand?" Ashford's voice was weak, but his meaning was clear. "You're going to put me somewhere safe and then fight them alone." She did not deny it. They reached the outcropping as the enemy vehicles drew within a kilometer. Alara positioned Ashford in a shallow depression between 2 boulders, pressing a rifle into his hands along with her remaining magazines. "Stay down," she said. "Do not engage unless they get past me." Alara. His hand caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite everything. "Who are you? Really?" She looked down at him. This man who had shown her kindness when no one else would, who had refused to leave her behind even when logic demanded it. "My name is Alara Vance," she said quietly. "Call sign Spectre, and I'm going to get you home." She pulled free before he could respond and moved to her position at the top of the outcropping. The enemy vehicles had stopped 400 meters out, disgorging fighters who spread into assault formation. They were professionals, moving with coordinated precision, using the terrain to cover their approach. But they were approaching a position held by the most lethal sniper their world had ever produced. Alara settled behind her rifle and let her breathing slow. The first fighter entered her crosshairs at 350 meters, his silhouette backlit by the headlights of his vehicle. She fired. The battle that followed would later be described in classified after-action reports as one of the most remarkable defensive engagements in special operations history. A single operator, armed with a stolen rifle and limited ammunition, held off a force of 23 enemy fighters for nearly 40 minutes. Alara fired with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark, each kill buying another few seconds of time. When they tried to flank her position, she anticipated their movement and cut them down in the open ground. When they attempted to use their vehicles as cover, she disabled the engines and turned the machines into death traps. The enemy commander was a veteran, a man who had fought Americans before and learned to respect their capabilities. But he had never faced anything like this. His fighters were dying in ones and twos, picked off by a ghost they could not see and could not suppress. Fear began to spread through his ranks. He made the decision to lead the final assault personally. Alara saw him coming, a tall figure in black who moved with the confidence of a man who had never been defeated. He drove his fighters forward through sheer force of will, accepting losses to close the distance. Her ammunition was running low. She had perhaps 10 rounds remaining when the first fighters reached the base of the outcropping. She shifted to her pistol and met them as they climbed. The close-quarters fighting was savage and brief. 2 fighters died on the rocks before they reached her position. A third made it over the lip and grappled with her in the darkness, his superior size and strength meaningless against her training and speed. She broke his arm and then his neck in 2 fluid motions. But the fourth fighter caught her from behind, his arms wrapping around her torso and pinning her weapon against her chest. She twisted and struck, but more hands grabbed her, dragging her down. The enemy commander stood over her as his surviving men held her immobile. Blood ran from a wound on his scalp where one of her rounds had grazed him, and his eyes burned with fury and grudging respect. "You killed 17 of my men," he said in accented English. "One woman, 17 men." Alara spat blood and met his gaze. "The night is not over yet." He raised his pistol and aimed at her head. "For you it is." The shot came from behind him. The enemy commander staggered, confusion crossing his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. He turned slowly toward the source of the gunfire. Ashford stood braced against a boulder 10 meters away, the rifle shaking in his hands, his battered face set with grim determination. He fired again, and the commander fell. The remaining fighters froze, their leader dead, their numbers decimated, their will finally broken. Alara used their hesitation to tear free from the hands holding her and retrieve her pistol. The last 3 enemy fighters died in the span of 4 seconds. Silence fell over the outcropping, broken only by the distant crackle of flames from the destroyed compound and the ragged sound of Ashford's breathing. Alara crossed to him as his legs gave out, catching him before he hit the ground. He looked up at her with his one good eye and managed something that might have been a smile. "Told you," he whispered, "not leaving you behind." In the distance, she heard the sound of helicopter rotors. The Black Hawk touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash, its side door already open before the skids hit the ground. Delgado was the first one out. His rifle, sweeping the perimeter before his eyes, found Alara kneeling beside, Ashford's prone form. He froze for a half-second, taking in the scene. The bodies scattered across the outcropping, the shell casings glinting in the helicopter's lights. The woman he had known as a logistics coordinator covered in blood and holding a pistol with the casual familiarity of someone who had carried one for years. Then training took over, and he was moving, shouting for the medic, helping to lift Ashford onto the stretcher that two other SEALs had rushed forward. "What happened here?" he asked as they worked. Alara rose to her feet, swaying slightly as exhaustion began to claim its due. "Later. Get him to medical. Now." The flight back to base took 11 minutes. Alara sat beside Ashford's stretcher, her hand resting on his arm as the medic worked to stabilize him. His eye fluttered open once during the flight, finding her face in the red glow of the cabin lights. "Still here," he murmured. "Still here," she confirmed. He smiled faintly and let unconsciousness take him again. Forward operating Base Falcon was in controlled chaos when they landed. Word had spread that the commander had been recovered, and personnel lined the path from the landing pad to the medical station. Alara walked beside the stretcher until they reached the surgical suite, where a team of trauma specialists took over with practiced efficiency. She stood outside the door for a long moment, watching through the window as they cut away Ashford's ruined uniform and began assessing the full extent of his injuries. Cracked ribs, punctured lung, severe contusions, possible internal bleeding. The list was long, but the prognosis was survival. He would live. She kept her promise. "Master Chief Vance." Delgado's voice pulled her from her vigil. "Senior Chief, Holt wants to see you in the operations center." Alara turned to find the young operator watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Curiosity, certainly. Respect, perhaps. And something else, something that looked almost like awe. She nodded and followed him across the base. The operations center fell silent when she entered. Every eye turned toward her, tracking the blood on her clothes, the bruises forming on her face, the way she moved with the controlled economy of someone who had pushed far past normal human limits. Holt stood at the tactical display, his face a mask that revealed nothing. Around him, the SEALs who had witnessed his failed rescue attempt watched with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning understanding. "Close the door," Holt said quietly. Delgado complied, and the soft click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Holt stared at Alara for a long moment. "I just got off the line with JSOC. They received Commander Ashford's preliminary debrief from the helicopter. You told them what you did." Alara said nothing. "He told them you infiltrated a hostile compound alone, that you eliminated 7 enemy snipers, including a counter-sniper team, that you extracted him under fire and then held off a force of over 20 fighters until rescue arrived." Holt's voice was flat, almost mechanical, as if he was reciting facts he could not quite process. "He said you killed more enemy combatants in one night than most operators see in an entire deployment." Still she remained silent. Holt took a step toward her. "I asked JSOC who you really are. They told me your file is classified above my clearance level, above the clearance level of anyone at this base." He paused. "Then they told me one thing. Your call sign." The word hung in the air between them. "Spectre." A murmur rippled through the assembled SEALs. The call sign was not unknown to them. It existed in the shadows of special operations, a whispered legend that most believed was myth or exaggeration. A ghost who eliminated targets that could not be reached. A phantom who extracted prisoners from places that could not be breached. Holt's jaw tightened. "I owe you an apology." "You owe Commander Ashford your gratitude that he is alive," Alara replied evenly. "You do not owe me anything. I treated you like a liability. I dismissed your expertise. I ignored your warnings." Holt's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "If I had listened to you, my men would not have been wounded. The commander might have been recovered days ago." Alara studied him, seeing past the pride and the shame to the man beneath. He was not evil. He was not even incompetent. He was simply a man who had allowed his assumptions to blind him to reality. "You made decisions based on the information you had," she said. "The failure was not in your tactics. It was in your refusal to accept information that contradicted your expectations." Holt absorbed this in silence. Then he did something that clearly cost him. He extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for saving our commander, for proving me wrong." Alara looked at his hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it. The room seemed to exhale collectively, tension dissolving into something that felt almost like acceptance. Delgado stepped forward. "What happens now?" "Now I wait for Commander Ashford to recover," Alara said. "Then I receive my next assignment." She glanced around the room at the faces watching her. "What I did here was never supposed to be witnessed. My cover is compromised. I cannot return to logistics work." "Where will you go?" someone asked. Alara allowed herself a small smile. "Wherever they need a ghost." She turned and walked out of the operations center, leaving behind a room full of operators who would spend the rest of their careers telling stories about the night a logistics coordinator turned out to be the deadliest sniper they had ever seen. 3 days passed before Ashford was strong enough to leave the medical station. Alara visited him each morning and evening, sitting beside his bed while he drifted in and out of consciousness. She did not speak much during these visits. Her presence was enough. On the 4th day, he was awake and lucid when she arrived. Someone had helped him shave, and though his face was still swollen and discolored, he looked more like the commander she had first met in the mess hall. "They want to give you a medal," he said as she settled into the chair beside his bed. "They cannot give me a medal. Officially, I was never here." Ashford smiled faintly. "Officially, a lot of things never happened. That has never stopped the people who matter from knowing the truth." Alara looked down at her hands, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I did not do it for recognition." "I know." He shifted slightly, wincing as his ribs protested. "You did it because I was decent to you. That is what you told Okonkwo." She looked up sharply. Ashford's smile widened slightly. "I have been conducting my own debriefs. Okonkwo told me about your conversation, about why you decided to act when no one would have blamed you for staying in your cover role." Alara was silent for a long moment. "My brother was killed in an operation that never existed. No one came for him. No one even tried." She met Ashford's eyes. "I swore I would never let that happen to someone else. Not if I could prevent it. Your brother was lucky to have you. He never knew what I became. He died before I finished training." She paused. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think if he could see me now." Ashford reached out and took her hand, his grip warm despite the 4 lines trailing from his arm. "I think he would be proud. Not because of what you can do, but because of why you do it." The word struck something deep inside her, a place she had armored so thoroughly that she had forgotten it existed. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back with the discipline of long practice. "Thank you," she said quietly. That afternoon, Ashford called a meeting. Every able-bodied member of his command gathered in the operations center, including the men still recovering from wounds sustained in Holt's failed rescue attempt. Alara stood at the back of the room, uncertain why she had been summoned. Ashford entered supported by 2 medics, waving off their assistants as he made his way to the front of the room. His movements were slow and careful, but his voice was strong when he spoke. "For days ago, I was a prisoner. I had been beaten, interrogated, and scheduled for execution. By all reasonable assessment, I should be dead." He paused, letting the words settle over his men. "I am not dead because of the actions of one person, a person most of you dismissed, ignored, or actively hindered." Alara felt the weight of every eye in the room turning toward her. Ashford continued, "I have requested and received authorization to read relevant portions of Master Chief Alara Vance's service record into this briefing. What I'm about to tell you is classified, and you will not repeat it outside this room." He lifted a tablet and began to read. "Master Chief Special Warfare Operator Alara Vance, former Marine Scout sniper, first woman to complete the program in its history. Recruited to Joint Special Operations Command for assignment to units that do not officially exist. Call sign Spectre." The room was utterly silent. 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. Operations conducted in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, and locations that remain classified. Credited with the elimination of 14 high-value targets that conventional forces failed to reach. Successfully extracted 11 prisoners from hostile custody prior to this operation. Ashford lowered the tablet and looked around the room. She infiltrated a compound held by over 30 enemy fighters. She eliminated 7 snipers, including a trained counter-sniper team. She extracted me under fire and then held off a pursuit force of 23 hostiles until rescue arrived, killing 17 of them in the process. He turned to face Alara directly. Master Chief Vance is the most capable operator I have encountered in 15 years of special operations. She accomplished alone what our entire team could not. And she did it after being treated with disrespect and dismissal by people who should have known better. Holt stood near the front of the room, his face tight with emotion. He stepped forward and turned to address the assembled men. I was one of those people, he said. I looked at her and saw a liability instead of an asset. I ignored her expertise because it did not fit my expectations. My failure nearly cost Commander Ashford his life, and it put our entire team at risk. He turned to Alara. I was wrong. We were wrong. One by one, the other SEALs followed his lead. Some simply nodded in acknowledgement. Others spoke brief words of respect or gratitude. Delgado crossed the room to stand beside her, his young face shining with barely contained emotion. I knew there was something about you, he said quietly. From the moment I saw you help that injured specialist. I just did not know what. Alara looked around the room at these men who had doubted her, dismissed her, and ultimately witnessed the truth of who she was. She had spent years operating in shadows, her accomplishments known only to a handful of people with sufficient clearance. She had never sought recognition, never wanted it. But standing here, surrounded by warriors who now understood what she was, she felt something she had not experienced since the day she learned of her brother's death. She felt like she belonged. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. All of you. Ashford smiled from his position at the front of the room. No, Master Chief. Thank you. 1 week after the rescue, Alara received her transfer orders. A new assignment in a location she could not name, pursuing objectives she could not discuss. The life of a ghost continued, even when the ghost had been seen. She spent her final morning at Forward Operating Base Falcon, saying goodbyes she had never expected to make. Holt found her outside the armory, where she was returning the equipment Okonkwo had helped her acquire. He stood awkwardly for a moment, a man unaccustomed to humility, struggling to find words. I've been doing this for 18 years, he finally said. I thought I knew what operators looked like, what they sounded like, how they carried themselves. He shook his head. You broke every assumption I had, and I'm grateful for it. Alara studied him. Learn from it. The next person you dismiss might be the one who saves your life, or fails to save it because I pushed them away. Holt extended his hand. If you ever need anything, Master Chief, anything at all, you know where to find us. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of a career warrior against her palm. Take care of your men, Senior Chief. They deserve a leader who sees them clearly. He nodded once and walked away, his shoulders carrying a weight that looked different than before. Not lighter, perhaps, but more honestly borne. Delgado was waiting for her near the helicopter pad, his young face struggling to contain emotions he had not yet learned to hide. I put in a request for sniper training, he said. The selection board meets next month. Alara allowed herself a small smile. You will do well. Because you think I have talent? Because you have something more important than talent. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You have the ability to see people for who they really are, not who you expect them to be. That will take you further than any skill with a rifle. Delgado's eyes glistened, but he held her gaze. Will I ever see you again? Probably not. But if you ever hear whispers about a ghost doing impossible things in impossible places, you will know. He surprised her then, stepping forward and embracing her briefly. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. She returned the embrace for just a moment before stepping back. Thank you for being the first one to see me. Okonkwo approached as Delgado walked away, her intelligence officer credentials displayed prominently on her uniform. Your transport is inbound. 15 minutes. Alara nodded. Thank you for your help. The armory access, the intelligence updates. I cannot have done it without you. Okonkwo smiled slightly. I just left a few doors open. You are the one who walked through them. She paused. The intelligence community is going to be talking about this operation for years. The Night Spectre came out of the shadows. The shadows are where I belong. Maybe. Okonkwo tilted her head. But now people know those shadows have teeth. The sound of an approaching helicopter drew their attention. Alara turned to see Ashford making his way across the compound, moving slowly but under his own power. The medics had cleared him for light duty that morning, though full recovery would take months. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. I'm not good at goodbyes, he said finally. Neither am I. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. When he opened his hand, Alara saw a worn challenge coin, its surface scratched and faded from years of being carried. This was given to me by my first commanding officer, Ashford said. He told me to pass it on when I found someone who embodied everything special operations should be. He pressed the coin into her palm. I have been carrying it for 15 years, waiting to find that person. Alara looked down at the coin, feeling its weight, understanding its meaning. Commander, I cannot accept this. You already have. He closed her fingers around it. You saved my life, Alara. Not just my body, but something else. He touched his chest. You reminded me why we do this. Why the sacrifices matter. Why the shadows need people like you standing in them. She felt tears threatening again and did not fight them this time. One slipped down her cheek, cutting a track through the dust that seemed permanently embedded in her skin. I will carry it with honor, she said. I know you will. The helicopter touched down behind them, its rotors filling the air with thunder and wind. Alara turned toward it, then paused and looked back. Ashford stood with Delgado and Holt flanking him, Okonkwo slightly behind. Beyond them, she could see other members of the team gathering to watch her departure. Men who had dismissed her, doubted her, and ultimately witnessed the truth of who she was. She raised her hand in a simple wave, and they responded in kind. Then she climbed into the helicopter and let it carry her away. As the base shrank beneath her, Alara withdrew the photograph of her brother from her pocket. She held it beside Ashford's challenge coin, the two objects representing everything she had lost and everything she had found. I kept my promise, Marcus, she whispered. I did not let him die in the shadows. The helicopter banked toward the horizon, toward a new mission in a new place where new enemies waited. She did not know what challenges lay ahead, only that she would face them the same way she had faced everything since the day her brother died. With skill, with determination, with the quiet certainty that some promises were worth any price. Below her, the desert stretched endless and indifferent, keeping its secrets as it always had. But somewhere in that vastness, in a compound still smoldering from her passage, stories were already being told. Whispered accounts of a woman who had done the impossible, who had walked into hell alone and walked out with a commander on her arm. The legend of Spectre had been a rumor before. Now it was something more. Now it was a warning. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character. Maybe you know someone who showed incredible strength when no one expected it, or perhaps you have witnessed hidden courage in your own life. We would love to hear about it.